Welcome to Experience Focused Leaders. I am delighted to introduce you to Randy Wootton, the content marketing pioneer, 3 times CEO in SaaS companies, and now helping CEOs wrestle with the go-to-market elephant and helping them build massive businesses. Randy, welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much, Alex. I don't know if as much as I was a pioneer or trying to hang on to the tail hook as this whole thing just transformed and morphed. It's been a wonderful journey. So I look forward to chatting about it and sharing some stories and war wounds.
Well, look, some of these companies, they're well known. Little company named Salesforce, RocketFuel, acquired by Seismic, and then Percolate, which was really helping define the content marketing platform category. That got acquired by Seismic, a sales enablement leader, and still continuing to be involved with companies like that. You're on the board of Opal. So I want to kind of dig in because a lot of our audience is interested in the challenges of marketing and sales coming together, and broadly in the opportunity to scale the content engine. I think there's some of it is very different for our customers who are in regulated industries, regulated functions. They have a lot more constraints. You were helping brand-oriented companies that maybe have some corporate constraints, but different markets do this. So let's dig in.
Sure.
What have you seen that's changed from, say, Percolate days to today in kind of the how the category involved and how the solution for around content marketing has shifted?
Well, if we start with Percolate, I joined after it had been founded. I came at sort of the last chapter to help it transform from what it had started out, which was a social media monitoring tool. And what's interesting is I do think that was really the revolution of content, was social media, and this idea of how do you think beyond kind of ebooks and emails and websites, but this whole dynamic playing out in near real time. And so there are a bunch of companies that kind of sprung up like mushrooms. I think of like Buddy Media, a couple others. Salesforce bought one for a crazy amount. I think they bought Salesforce for a crazy amount of money. Remember Benioff was like, everything's going to be social.
Well, Benioff is the best at switching to whatever is the latest flavor of the day. Right. Whether we're ready for it or not at Salesforce, it's kind of beyond the point. But wherever is the wave, we're going to be on top of it, and that is actually a skill in itself.
It was brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Every year he came out with Dreamforce, and it was what's the next cloud, right? Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, Analytics Cloud, Social Cloud. But he's one of the most brilliant marketers out there, and it was a forcing function for all of us. I spent a couple of years there, and it was a rhythm to bring a huge number of people together to drive to release and wow the world. So he was doing content marketing in a way that no one else was. Percolate had its origins in this idea of social media management, which was, how do you make this all work? And I do think when I joined the company, we were making a transition to content marketing more broadly across all channels. And so I try to describe it as how I thought marketing was all going to move at the pace and pattern of social. Meaning, like, you remember when social first came out, it was like something would pop on Twitter, and you'd have to have a response to it, and then you'd want to have that sort of play out across your other channels, like get an email out, and then have your website updated, and have this interaction with your customers in a way that's never been done before. Brands prior to social, you put out content, and you just, it was sort of like consumers.
It would stagnate there for a while. You'd be lucky if it had the current year in the footer,
right?
Updated,
right? And there was no feedback from the customers, no real-time feedback. So social was enabling this real-time dialogue. And so how do you manage that conversation? So I think that was the first pivot. The big challenge at the time, for those who remember, was each of the marketing distribution channels had its own tech stack. So you had an email solution, you had a website solution, you had the social solution, and they didn't work together. And so one of the things we were trying to do at Percolate was saying we want to be like a content hub. And how do we create content orchestration, so people understand the overarching brief, they understand how they're going to build their assets, and then they plug into those systems of distribution. So from system of orchestration and system of production to system of distribution, and then have it all be coordinated and tied with data. So have all the content be tagged. So then you could loop back and see what was working. And that was really the bridge when I talked to Doug Winter, who was CEO of Seismic, is they were thinking about sales as a channel, right? And the conflict at the time was marketing would produce assets that sales wouldn't use. Sales would say marketing's assets suck. Marketing would say, but we're giving you all this asset, you never use it. We don't know how to get better. And so what Doug and I thought was we could have content marketing anchored in the office of the CMO, where marketers are producing content, bridge into sales enablement, a category that Doug and Seismic were leading, specifically for sales content, and then have it all tagged and have that flow back into the marketer's interface and technology, so they could get better at their content. So that was the thesis, and that's what we did for a couple of years, and then I left, and I don't know what's happened since then.
But what's your gut level? Like when I observed the industry, I was like, the time when I saw the acquisition, I was like, wow, that is interesting, right? Like finally sales and marketing are going to have a love affair. They're not going to fight with each other. Nobody's going to blame for the leads that are crappy, and the marketing is not going to complain that their content is not getting used properly. Like, we all know that story. I've happened to wear sales and marketing hats in the past, and so I love the potential. But I think when I look at most sales enablement vendors, not just Seismic, I think they talk to marketers. They're obviously an influencer. They distribute the content through the sales enablement systems, but they're really not marketing platforms. It's just they're still, at the end of the day, very sales focused, right? And so there's not the content, let's just say, still, for the most part, right? Like, we've talked about some exceptions, but content for the most part is more sales oriented, a little, doesn't have the marketing flair. Was a few interactive content pieces you somehow managed to squeeze in there, and I think that's a big missed opportunity, almost, that it didn't really connect. That's my thesis, because I bet that in the current world, the best salespeople are able to use AI scale marketing techniques to personalize outreach to a much larger number of prospects, have more self-guided buyer experiences. And the best marketers really think like sellers, right? Like, they really are thinking, I'm going to not just deliver some leads, I'm going to really drive pipeline. I'm going to pick up the low end segment of the market and turn that into revenue. I'm going to not talk about sales efficiency, but really deliver, hyper qualified customers to the sales team. And I don't know if that vision has really clicked. When I meet some of our customers, it happens, but it seems to be in smaller teams where marketing person is literally sitting next to sales and they're supporting them. And that's where you get that vision. But the moment you go to larger organizations, I don't know if the dots connected. What's your take? And did you manage to make progress there?
There's a spectrum, right? And I think it depends. What I saw when I was at Seismic was, if there was tight alignment between the head of sales and the head of marketing, sometimes falling under one CRO, who was saying, look, we're spending a bunch of money on technology, the data isn't connected, we need a consolidated stack, and they invest in something like go-to-market ops versus just marketing ops and sales ops. So they have one organization, often that's involved with sales enablement, sales training, but it's like a center of excellence around driving efficiency and effectiveness. You find it work. And I think at Seismic, one of the reasons why they were really successful is, unlike many companies that start off, go SMB, mid-market, enterprise, Seismic started at enterprise. And they were able to deal with the complexity of lots of people and users and administration and all this stuff. And so they were able to support these enormous companies. You have to, I don't know which I can talk about, but you can look at their website to see the big brands, where it was extraordinary, tens of thousands of salespeople and marketing teams in multiple countries trying to coordinate and distribute information. And so I would say, for the big enterprise use case, if there was alignment, then it would work. If it wasn't alignment, they would fight. I think your second point that you made was, a lot of the sales enablement tools have still stayed primarily sales enablement, i.e. getting content in the seller's hands so that they can use it to interact with buyer. Yeah, I agree. I don't think sales enablement was set up to be marketing. I sit on the board of another company called Opal, which we used to compete with at Percolate, and they've actually had luck at some great brands, really incredible brands, often B2C brands, because they've come at it from a marketing perspective and solving the more marketing orchestration problem. And so how does a CMO set up their objectives of what they want to try to achieve this year? How does that translate into quarterly campaigns? How does that fall into monthly campaigns? And then have that marketing strategy manifest in the planning and the execution. So they are not as tightly integrated with Seismic as they could be, but I think Seismic with Percolate, the legacy Percolate content marketing orchestration, is further along the path of offering an integrated solution than some of the other sales enablement providers out there that start in sales.
Just because of that history, because of that kind of, there was the belief at least that this is worth and why they invested money in this. And
but
now
use
this.
I mean, the only other point I was going to make is you do have different budgets. So who pays for it, right? It all comes down to where, and so unless you have a CEO aligned with the go-to-market team, like we're thinking about technology investments across functions, then the marketing person is going to say, well, I'm going to use my money on, 6 cents for intent because that's where I think I can get the most value. And the salespeople are going to say, well, I'm going to use my money on Gong because I want to solve forecasting. But you need like a really strong rev ops or go-to-market ops leader who can say, no. When we think about overall impact versus value, having a system like this that allows us to distribute, measure content efficacy is worth it.
Yeah, and my hope when the titles of CRO started coming up, I thought, finally, it's not a chief sales officer, it's like a CRO, but I think eventually it looks like CRO just became another word for head of sales.
I think so. And there are different types of CROs. Like I've been
but as an 80 percentile, right? Like we were like, because I was of your, I thought like finally they get it. It's like it's revenue. They all line up, and I think theoretically yes, and it does happen. And I think it happens maybe, like you said, whether there's a leadership or there people really have ran into big problems and they decided to tackle it, right? So you need to kind of step into the problem long enough to try to change the dynamic. And we were talking earlier that and you were saying was in marketing itself, like, okay, it's great if we can bring marketing and sales, but they all live in the different tools. And so you really need to start thinking, well, can we build a tool or a platform that actually works for both? And that's very hard, right? Like, because I think Gong has very different DNA than 6 Sense and so on, right? And then the tooling, and then you were saying that, well, the marketing is so bifurcated itself and so technically difficult, then people running one tactic and one kind of content people versus demand gen people, they have their tools and they're different, and so it's hard to even bring the one together, much less marketing and sales. So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, you see that the big clouds, right? Like we were talking about Salesforce earlier, trying to build out a marketing cloud. They basically bought ExactTarget, which is a tonnage type email. And then they had, within that was Pardot, which was like a B2B email system. I won't comment on either, but then they bought Buddy Media and they brought that together. And the two systems never worked. And so what you found with Salesforce, and I think you see with Microsoft and Oracle, is unless the technology, you got to go down to bare metal. And what I mean by that is you got to have a common architecture in terms of the data structure, in terms of what do you mean by a lead? What do you mean by an opportunity? What do you mean by an account? What do you mean by a channel? What do you mean by content? How's that stuff tagged and captured within the data that then now, as we've broached into AI, you put an intelligence layer on top of that. If you don't have an architecture to support it, it's just madness, because you have, like, think about marketing attribution and how many systems are out there to try to tell you where, when you spend your money on X, how is that compared to Y? I so many not arguments, but just heated discussions with my marketing team around LinkedIn versus G2 versus email, and then sales is in a whole nother channel. Should you hire another BDR? Should you invest more in content? It's so hard to have one source of truth across all your go-to-market. because of the way the data structure is distributed and captured and the timing and the near real time or programmatic advertising. It's just wackadoodle. It's so complicated.
Yeah, and I think when I reflect on our journey was building Relayto, we found that the marketers, and it could be enterprise, could be very complex, but the marketer that's very intimately working with sales, right? And they roll up their sleeves and support the big proposals, and they know the campaigns, and they know who are the, like, so it's kind of, I would say, account-based marketers tend to have more of a pulse of where they're able to connect the dots. And so they would use us for the more, a little top of the funnel was that some ABM, but it's still pretty targeted, and they know how to apply that correctly. And then that goes all the way to, you know, how do we make a digital buyer experience, a proposal that closes. And that partnership seems to be working in those pockets where there is no hiding behind the tools and the reports, right? Like, you're deeply aligned. The teams are almost concentrated, like where you put a marketer, just like you have an SDR, you know, supporting salespeople, right? Like they have to, and it sees you, they have to work together in little pods. Where you have a pod of marketers working closely with a sales team, good things happen in terms of that alignment. And when you don't, you end up, you know, maybe scale, but it sort of, there's a lot of friction along the way. That's sort of what I'm seeing, at least.
Well, think about this. One of the hardest things why marketers, CMOs have a lifespan about 18 months is or less, is because marketing covers such a broad surface area in terms of capabilities. You have at one end of the spectrum, like database marketers, you have demand gen folks. At the other end of the spectrum, you got brand people. And brand in terms of like visual representation, voice, tone. You have content, thought leadership type of brand marketers. And in the middle, I think what you're pointing to is product marketing. So product marketing, they need to understand the product at a level of detail that they could engage in a sales cycle and add value. Listen to what a prospect is saying and saying, oh, I understand the problem or the opportunity here. I know the set of capabilities. I can help translate that into content. That's a very different skill set than demand gen, which is optimizing your search results, and brand, which is creating a really compelling brand experience. And I think what happens is the context of the company, the CEO's orientation, if they're not clear about what the company really needs from their CMO, they hire the wrong type of CMO. Or they hire a CMO that's like, I also think there's a really strong argument that positioning and messaging, category creation and definition, is a skill unto itself, which is different than brand, it's different than product marketing. So if you have
I think typically it's too important to be left to marketers, right? Like, I think because the marketers will potentially revert to the Gartner categories and trying to outcompete iteratively in the existing place where they could get leads, right? Because the leads are already there. And the true category design breaks through that and, you know, shapes the narrative and, you know, takes you completely in the areas where generally marketers don't have the mandate to even take the company there.
But the best marketers, you know, call it strategic marketers, are like the right hand of a CEO. And when I've had great thought partners, so you can talk about your corporate strategy and where you need to go, that needs to translate into a narrative, a corporate narrative, that then translates into positioning and messaging. And so to your point, is do you have marketers who do that? I have people I know and I bring in as consultants who do this. Bob Wright from Firebricks is probably one of the best in the world at doing this. And, you know, this is all he does is positioning and messaging. Tracy Lloyd at Emotive Brand is another one of these people that just does this all the time. And I think I'm working right now with Bruce Cleveland. He wrote he was CMO at several companies, and he wrote the book Crossing Traction Gap, which is I recommend to any CEO. And I'm working with him on a client, a customer, and just watching his magic in terms of how we think about the category and how that translates into a marketing blueprint, the positioning and messaging. So to your point, Alex, I think that leads everything else. You can't do marketing unless you have your positioning sorted. And as CEO, you may not be, especially if you're a technical founder, like if your audience is a bunch of tech folks, like go find one of these people or call me or LinkedIn me, whatever. We can put you in touch, because nailing that story, and it's a crisp little narrative, absolutely in line with the gentleman you were talking about who wrote Play Bigger.
This is Christopher Lockhead. Yeah, it's so funny that you bring this up. We just interviewed him for the pod yesterday, so it's fresh. And I think, yeah, it's an absolutely different skill set. You do need to understand what marketing needs to do, right? Like you still need to deliver the category. You need to launch it effectively and spread it, but it's a different mindset.
So going back to your point, like that is a very specific skill set. If you've hired a CMO for that, that's what they're going to do. They're probably not going to get as good as at demand gen, but they have to build a team, and you have to build a structure and organization to enable that. And just because you do the positioning doesn't mean you can create compelling content on social or compelling content through email. And so how do you have a content orchestration? I still fundamentally, Alex, we may have not said this at the beginning of the podcast, I think content is the atomic unit of communication. And in the world, even AI powered, people process information, and that the capsule of that is content. And so I think people undervalue. And look, I was an English major. I taught literature. So I believe in the well-written word, right? I have a Substack, so I get it. I have a bias. But I think like people don't buy.
But you were somebody who came from content, from an English major, who was a CEO, right? Of a company is very different, in a very different, very technical and finance space. So that's important distinction.
Yeah, I think you're right. If I think about it, obviously that's why I leaned into that, and that's what I found super compelling throughout my entire career, was writing compelling, words and trying to drive influence for people. And so I think content is the vehicle for that. I've always believed that, and I think we are at the cusp of the next, everyone's talked about it, generational transformation. Content will be transformed. I'm writing a book and working with AI to do it. And the way I think about a ghostwriter or a copy editor or a research assistant is radically different than what I was doing 3 years ago. That is going to change everything in the way that marketers think about communicating for brands.
Well, on that note, one of the things that we observe is that obviously everything is leaning towards content overwhelm, right? Some of it is going to be well done, where you're tutoring the platform to do things. You have years of experience. You know how to do how to do content in the first place. And then some of it is going to be somebody, in outsourced location doing outsourced content, not having subject matter expertise and regurgitating whatever they get from OpenAI. And so in that world, I want to wear the shoes of the consumer and ask, what would a consumer need to see to trust the content? Because let's assume they'll get the content, right? Like there's very little doubt. What is it that's going to get them to trust it, to experience it in the deluge of content that they will, to the point they're digested, and maybe move beyond, another piece of content in the drip of content crap that is going to be to all kind of have recency effect and so on. But actually, if I'm catching somebody, they have trust, they have an experience, and they are moving from that experience towards the next meaningful step in the journey. What would that look like? Was the assumption that cost of content is zero?
Sorry, the cost of content
cost of creating content is zero, and so we're just
right.
We're all swimming in content.
What I would say is I think we're in the awkward teenage years, or maybe youth. I do think everyone's going to have their own agent, and that agent will do a lot of filtering and doing a bunch of research. And that I still do think that I need to go buy a new refrigerator, right? I don't need to buy a new refrigerator until I need to buy a new refrigerator. But when I want to buy a new refrigerator, I need to find out all the content. And so if I have an agent as an interface between me and all the content I could possibly learn about new refrigerators and impact on the environment and, ice machines, all that, I think people will be better informed buyers, and the brands that are going to win are going to be able to have discrete pieces of content that can, well, just take this as an example. Gen search right now, all G2 dropping off a cliff. Google search, we're seeing the death of the blue link. People are not doing Google search anymore to buy stuff. They go to even Google is putting its AI results above, right? It's blue links. But I do all my stuff in ChatGPT, anything I want to buy. So unless you are a brand that's optimizing for LLMs and able to get your brand into consideration, you're totally out. Because I think the way people are accessing information, so much like in the revolution of SEO and SEM, there was a company called SEM Rush that helped lead to the whole advent of like SEM agencies. There's a guy, Todd Paris, who's CEO of a company called IQ Rush, and they're optimizing LLMs. They're optimizing brand placement in LLMs. I think that's the next battleground, especially in B2C. But like if so you have this kind of interface when I'm working with ChatGPT, hey, I want to buy a new car and I'm interested in speed versus fuel efficiency. And then I want, blah, 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 blah. And I just feel like there's so many more variables that I can construct. Now, if I had an agent who knew me and understood all those variables, I wouldn't have to go through the training of the prompts, right? I'd be able to just have, here's 4 things for you to consider. And I think it, like protein powder. I'm down the rabbit hole on protein powder these days. And which protein powder should I take at these different stages? Like rather than doing 50 Google searches, I do one ChatGPT with two conversions. So I think to your point, the way the consumers are buying is radically changing. The brands are able to intercept that and understand the evolution of content and how to create it, distribute it, personalize it are going to be the winners. Those that don't are going to be the losers.
Brilliant. Last question. Seismic had a strong presence in regulated content, regulated verticals. A lot of our customers also come from, corporate communications functions and publicly listed companies. They can't take a bet that, the annual report will be written for them, but they still want somebody to consume it, whether it's an analyst or bot. And likewise, niche industries like employee benefits, highly regulated, but all of the US employers have, this around this time of the year, they have to go figure out what to enroll. Companies are spending 24 grand per employee on benefits and nobody understands what they're getting. The HR barely understands it, employees barely understand it. And, the benefit advisors are stuck answering, the same questions over and over again. So that's an example of a regulated content where you can't trust your generic LLM to answer things in a way that you're not going to get sued out of your existence. And so what do you do in that world? What do you think is going to be the approaches that will succeed?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge with the LLMs today in terms of content creation is a stateless environment. It's hard to understand where the source is and to have a consistent compliance and governance. And so that problem hasn't been solved. Seismic was, legacy. They controlled the content through
They controlled the content. Yeah.
They controlled the content. They had ways to do quality checks. And I think all I could think of is you still need a human in the loop, where you have augmented content generation. You have someone who's able to do the final QA. Maybe you have, I think you can have agents who can act as paralegals to check the content to see if there's any risks or misuse of brands or, not enough trademark. But I think you still would probably need in the interim period some way to create checklists, audits, document the sources, document the audit. So you have the output, which would say, this content is aligned with all of our objectives and, once a quarter it's accurate. But I do think that world, that messy world of LLMs, stateless environment, not having the sources, not having the compliance makes it hard.
Yeah, understood. Randy, super fun to connect with you. Where can our audience find you further so they could get advice on how to scale their business?
Yeah, probably the easiest way. So I have this advisory service called CEOx. I've got 4 things that I'm doing. It's CEOx.io. I'm always available on LinkedIn. And if you want to send me a note, it's Randy at CEOx.io. happy to chat and got lots of time and love meeting entrepreneurs who are wrestling with either scaling their business or figuring out how to build go-to-market replicable engines. That's what I get, juice from. So look forward to chatting with folks from your podcast. And thanks, Alex, for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Randy.